Hi, witches. I'm Blair Bathory, and this is the Something Scary podcast. Thank you so much for being here, whether this is your first time or you're one of the brave souls who join us every week. I wanted to say that we had a great time at our first Spooky Film Club live stream. For those of you who were with us, thanks so much. We were talking about The Substance and we dissected it and we discussed my love for this movie. Seriously, if you haven't seen it, go watch it. For those of you who want to join on our next month's film club stream, sign up now for the Storyteller Experience on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/somethingscary. While so many of us are focused on celebrating the holidays with family and friends, we might not see the darkness creeping in, hitting when you least expect it, whispering from shadows, lingering in the cold, or brushing against you just as you turn your head. It's in the stillness of a quiet house that holds secrets we can't shake. Beware what waits in the silence. Some things are meant to be left undiscovered. First, Snowbound Vengeance, followed by The Watcher Hides in the Light. Finally, in our last story, Elves Don't Play Fair. So, wanna hear something scary? Silent Frights. Sometimes even a thick blanket of snow can't cover blood and vengeance, like in this story inspired by Robert of Tula. It was the winter of 2015 when I arrived in St. Petersburg. A journalist fresh out of college, I was eager to prove myself. My first major assignment seemed destined to thrust me into the thick of intrigue. A series of unexplained disappearances had gripped the nation. Prominent figures, not political dissidents, but oligarchs, celebrities, and cultural elites vanished without a trace. I stepped out of the airport into the teeth of a Russian winter. Snow fell in thick sheets, muffling sound and making the sprawling city eerily quiet. A biting wind cut through layers of clothing, and the streets felt devoid of warmth and humanity. I checked into a modest hotel, where the receptionist's clipped tone and indifferent glance heightened the gnawing sense of unease. That night, I lay in bed listening to the room settle. A faint draft whispered through the cracks of the window. In the dim light, I noticed a spider weaving a web in the corner of the room. My grandmother used to say spiders brought luck, but its deliberate movements felt ominous, as though it spun a trap, not a home. Sleep did not come easily. At some point in the night, I awoke to whispers. They were faint, like a conversation drifting through walls too thick to allow sound. I sat up, heart pounding, but the room was empty save for the shadows stretching unnaturally long under the weak moonlight. I chalked it up to jet lag and an overactive imagination. The next day, I followed a tip to an unexpected lead, Anya Yikelbuff, daughter of Alexander Yikelbuff, one of the missing oligarchs. Anya was infamous for her extravagant lifestyle and penchant for drama on social media. Rumors suggested she might know more than she let on. Anya agreed to meet me at her family's luxurious apartment that evening. The walk to her address was surreal. St. Petersburg, a city I had always imagined bustling with life, seemed frozen in time. The streets were almost silent, the snow absorbing even the faintest sound of footsteps. Frost-encrusted windows glowed dimly, but no faces peered out. When I arrived, the penthouse was a monument to decadence. Its marble floors and gold accents an almost obscene contrast to the icy desolation outside. Anya greeted me with an air of bored detachment, her icy blue eyes scrutinizing me like a specimen. She was beautiful in a way that felt sculpted, almost artificial. We sat in a room dominated by a crystal chandelier, its light refracting onto the walls in sharp, angular patterns. "My father," she said, twirling a strand of platinum hair, "he's gone. People vanish all the time here. It's nothing new." Her tone was flippant, almost mocking. She seemed to relish my discomfort, her smirk widening when she noticed me shivering. I tried steering the conversation back to her father, but her answers became increasingly evasive. Finally, she stood abruptly. "Come," she said, slipping on a fur-lined coat. "I'll walk you back. These streets aren't safe." The thought of navigating the silent, snow-covered labyrinth alone was unappealing, so I followed. The streets were darker now, the faint light of street lamps distorted by falling snow. Shadows moved with the wind, stretching and contorting. I glanced back several times, convinced we were being followed. But each time I turned, the street was empty. "You're nervous," Anya said, her voice carrying a trace of amusement. I shrugged. My unease deepened when she stopped abruptly, her eyes fixed on my necklace, a simple silver cross that had belonged to my grandmother. "That's beautiful," she said, her tone shifting to something sharper. "Give it to me." I hesitated, taken back by her sudden demand, and said it wasn't for sale. Her smile faded, replaced by an expression that chilled me more than the wind ever could. She said I didn't understand, and tried to take it from me. Before I could react, a gust of wind swept through the street, carrying with it a whisper that seemed to come from all directions. Anya's face went pale, her eyes wide with terror as she turned. A figure emerged from the shadows, impossibly tall and draped in tattered robes that billowed against the wind. His face was gaunt, his skin deathly pale, and his glowing blue eyes fixed on Anya.
"Anya,"
he said, his voice deep and resonant.
"you have taken what does not belong to you. The debt must be paid."
Whispering a distressed no, she backed away. The figure raised a hand, and frost began to creep around the ground, reaching for her like a living thing. When it touched her boots, she screamed. The frost climbed her legs, turning her veins an unnatural shade of blue that pulsed like frozen rivers beneath her skin. She writhed in agony as the ice consumed her, her skin cracking audibly, her body contorted, her cries fading into the howling wind. When she crumbled, it was as though her very essence shattered, glittering shards carried away like dust in the air. I stood frozen in place, too terrified to move as the figure turned his gaze to me. His eyes were not angry, but sorrowful, as though he pitied me for witnessing what I could never unsee.
"Go,"
he said, his voice reverberating in my chest.
"Speak not of what you have seen."
And then he was gone, leaving only silence and the oppressive cold. I stumbled back to my hotel, my breath fogging in the frigid air. The room felt no safer than the streets. Shadows seemed to flicker just beyond my vision, and the spider's web in the corner now glistened as if coated in frost. I tried to sleep, but the whispers returned, louder this time, and I could swear they spoke my name. At some point, I thought I saw Anya's reflection in the window, her cracked, frozen face staring back at me. Her lips moved silently, forming words I couldn't understand, but knew I didn't want to. When dawn came, it brought no relief. The spider's web now bore my silver cross, its delicate strands woven around it like a shrine. Beneath it, etched in frost, was a single word.
"Repent."
Would you trust a stranger in an empty, snow-covered city? Would you leave behind everything to escape a haunting you can't explain? Who was the stranger that emerged to save the journalist? Sometimes the weight of history lingers in the quietest places, waiting for the light to reveal its shadows, like in this story written by Sara. Snow fell steadily in Kazimierz Dolny, an old town in Poland. The air was quiet and cold. Bits of the cobblestone street peeked out from under the snow and glistened in the streetlights. The town had an air of timelessness, which was the very reason Hannah Kagan chose to move her family there, but she didn't expect it to feel so detached from everything. The house was charming in its way, though its age showed in the creaking floorboards and the way the windows rattled in their frames when the wind passed against them. It had been vacant for years, long enough for its history to settle into the bones of the building. The Kagans, eager for a fresh start, had paid no attention to the stories their neighbors were reluctant to share. Inside, the family busied themselves preparing for Hanukkah. The menorah, a polished brass heirloom handed down through Hannah Kagan's family, was placed in the front window, its presence a beacon of tradition and faith. The first candle was lit, its warm glow cutting through the cold and darkness. As the flames flickered, Hannah's thoughts lingered on the town's silence. It felt deeper than the snow's muffling effect, as though the quiet stretched back decades, resting heavily on the house. She didn't like it. She brushed the feeling away, thinking they just weren't settled into the house yet. She turned her focus to the laughter of her children, Leah and Aiden, as they played dreidel by the fire. But later that night, after the candles had burned low and the family went to sleep, Hannah stirred uneasily. A sound, soft yet deliberate, drifted through the house. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and peered out the frost-rimmed window. At first, she saw nothing but the snow-covered street. Then, just beyond the glow of the street lamp, a figure emerged. It was dark and indistinct, standing still among the falling snow, almost blending into the shadows. Hannah's breath caught, but when she blinked, the figure was gone. She turned away, her heart pounding. It's just the shadows playing tricks, she told herself, though the unease lingered. The second night of Hanukkah brought the same sense of being watched. After lighting the menorah, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling of something being out of place. The flame cast flickering shadows on the walls. She glanced at the window and froze. The figure had returned. She stood closer now, just beyond the glass, a dark silhouette blurred by frost. Its presence was oppressive, as if it carried the weight of countless winters. Hannah's hand trembled as she stepped back, her heart pounding. The flames on the menorah sputtered, as though responding to the figure. When she dared to look again, the figure was gone, leaving only a faint impression in the snow. By the third night, her unease turned to dread. She kept the children close, forcing cheerfulness into her voice as they lit the menorah. The figure appeared almost immediately, looming outside the window, unmoving yet palpable. This time, Hannah thought she saw its head tilt, a slow, deliberate motion that sent a rush of blood through her veins. "Sam?" she whispered, gripping her husband's arm. "Do you see that?" Samuel frowned, peering out the window. He saw nothing. Maybe it was the frost or the reflection of the flames, but Hannah wasn't convinced. As Samuel turned away, the figure's hand rose, pale and skeletal, pressing against the other side of the glass. She gasped, startling her husband. When he asked what was wrong, she pointed, but the figure was gone. Hannah's doubt clawed at her. Was it real? A trick of the light? Or something worse? Something tied to the house's long-buried secrets? Or was she just losing her mind? The fourth night brought answers she hadn't sought but could no longer ignore. After Hannah hurried the family to bed early, she crept to the living room to sit by the almost extinguished candles. As the menorah's glow filled the room, the air grew heavy. The temperature dropped, and she felt prepared to face whatever was coming. The house seemed to breathe, its silence broken by a low, mournful voice. Hannah froze, the voice threading through her like icy water. It spoke to her of a family that had once lived in that house and was torn apart during World War II. They had been betrayed, their faith used against them, their lives extinguished in an act of cruelty that left its mark on the house. One name lingered in the air: Samuel Adler. Hannah's breath quickened, the voice grew louder and filled with sorrow. The flames on the menorah flared wildly, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to take on life of their own. The figure outside the window was no longer still. It pressed its face against the glass, its features blurred yet unmistakably human, a man's face, etched with despair. The frost on the window melted where it stood, leaving streaks like tears. A loud creak shattered the silence, and the door to the children's room swung open. Hannah ran, her pulse pounding, to find Leah and Aiden huddled together, wide-eyed. Leah whimpered, "Someone is whispering in our room." Hannah held them close, her mind racing. She returned to the living room to find the figure gone and the frost reforming on the glass. The voice had faded, but its final words lingered in her mind. "Light the way." the Kagan family continued their Hanukkah celebrations with a deeper sense of purpose. The menorah's light, reflected in the frosted window, became a symbol not only of faith, but of remembrance, a way to honor the lives lost and to ensure their stories were never forgotten. Though they never saw the figure again, Hannah sometimes felt a presence in the quiet moments of the night and would hear whispers in her sleep. It no longer scared her. It acted as a gentle reminder. The Watcher was gone, but his spirit had left behind a promise. That light, even in the darkest places, could endure. Would you keep lighting candles if a figure got closer to your house every time? Do you believe you could tell the difference between a good presence and an evil one? Have you? If so, tell us your story by emailing us at somethingscary@snarled.com. Sometimes the cheerful holiday spirit is hiding dark shadows you can't escape. Like in this story, inspired by Lorelei. The first night of December, the worst night of the year, I huddled in the corner of my bed, pulling the blanket tight around me like it could shield me from what was coming. Midnight had struck, and the air felt heavier. The house was alive, creaking and groaning in ways that set my nerves on edge. The sound crawled through the hallway, just beyond my door. My chest tightened as I held my breath, trying to make myself small, invisible. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. I froze as the tapping grew louder. My hand instinctively reached for the edge of the blanket to cover my face. But before I could, something grabbed my arm. I bit back a scream, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. "Tom?" Jax whispered, his voice low but firm. I could barely see him in the faint light of his flashlight, but I knew that look on his face. He was scared too, even if he wouldn't admit it. "Get up, we have to go." I shook my head. Every year this happened. Every year we played the game, and every year it got worse. But no matter how much I wanted to stay hidden, I knew he was right. Jax handed me a flashlight and I gripped it like a lifeline. The moment we opened the door, the house felt different. The air was thicker, the shadows darker. The tap echoed down the hallway, fading and reappearing as if mocking us.
"Elf on a shelf wants to play. Come and find me before the break of day."
Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, high-pitched and grating like a broken toy. My stomach churned. The rules hadn't changed. We had to find it before sunrise. If we didn't, I didn't want to think about that. Jax nudged me forward and we crept down the hallway. The floor creaked beneath our bare feet, each sound making me flinch. The flashlight beam trembled in my hands, illuminating the long corridor ahead. I tried to focus on the familiar surroundings, the family photos of the wall, the clock at the end of the hall, but even those seemed warped, distorted in the unnatural darkness. We checked the living room first. The tree was already up, its ornaments glinting faintly in the flashlight's glow. I half expected to see the elf perched among the branches, grinning that awful grin, but the room was empty, silent except for the faint hum in the walls. The kitchen was next. Jax moved quickly, pulling open cabinets, yanking out drawers. I stayed close, scanning the corners, the shadows. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. The clock on the microwave blinked 12:37, still early, but the hours passed faster during the game. The voice came again.
"Hide and seek. Find me before sunrise, or your whole family dies."
I stumbled, my knees hitting the cold tile. My hands shook so badly I dropped the flashlight, the beam spinning wildly. Jax hauled me up, his grip firm despite the panic in his eyes. He didn't say anything, just shoved the flashlight back into my hands and kept moving. We searched the entire first floor, then climbed the stairs to the second. My legs felt like lead. My head throbbed with every step. The voice laughed at us, echoing from the walls. Sometimes I thought I saw it, a flash of red in the corner of my vision, a shadow darting past. But it was always gone when I turned to look. By the time we reached the basement, Jax was limping. Blood smeared his shin, though I didn't know how he'd gotten hurt. He wouldn't stop, and I couldn't either. The flashlight flickered as we opened the door to the basement. The stairs groaned under our weight. The air down here was heavier, colder. I could barely breathe. Jax motioned for me to follow as we began searching the cluttered space. The beams of our flashlights bounced across the room, catching the edges of forgotten boxes and old furniture. A sharp laugh cut through the silence. I spun around, nearly dropping my flashlight again.
Hide and seek.
It taunted, the words dragging like nails down a chalkboard.
I'm so close.
A sob caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but keep going, but I didn't. I couldn't. We searched the basement, tearing through piles of junk, but there was no sign of Elf. The laughter grew louder, closer. My flashlight flickered again, and for a moment, the room plunged into total darkness. I heard Jax's sharp intake of breath. The light returned, dimmer now, but enough to see the terror on his face. He grabbed my arm and pulled me up the stairs, back into the house. The living room was silent, still, too still. My legs trembled as we staggered inside. I could see the faintest hint of light through the curtains, the first fragile glow of dawn. Relief flooded me, but Jax's face stayed tight. Something's wrong, he muttered. The curtains ripped open with a violent gust, and I gasped as the room was bathed in pale golden light. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then I saw it. It stood in the middle of the room, its plastic face grinning, its beady black eyes staring straight at us. Its limbs twitched unnaturally, moving like a puppet with invisible strings. Jax screamed. The sound shattered the silence, and then the house exploded with noise. The walls shook, the air filled with a chorus of screams. Mine, Jax's, and others I couldn't place. The last thing I saw was the elf moving toward us, its grin widening. Then everything went black. I woke to silence. Morning light filled the room, but when I looked over, Jax was gone. As I slowly moved through the house, I followed a red trail that led to the attic. I climbed, shaking, and found Jax in the corner. He was pale, frozen, and surrounded by them, the elves. Their faces weren't smiling anymore.
You lost.
The lead elf hissed at me, its voice sharp and cold. I ran. Outside the house was still, but I knew the truth. They weren't done with me. It was only the first day of December. What would you do if a simple holiday tradition turned into a nightmare? Have you ever felt like something innocent was watching you, waiting? This week's podcast stories were edited by Sara Lukasiewicz, narration by Blair Bathory, audio edited and mixed by Fitz Harris, additional audio editing by Calvin Linderman, produced by Ana Villalobos, executive produced by Gail Gilman, music by Sapphire Sindalo and Calvin Linderman.